Hello! This little video here will run through the code that's running our Arduino FreeFall measurement device. Like it says here, this code will measure the time taken for the ball to fall from the upper sensor, which you should know is the clothespin, to the lower sensor, which is the piece of chloroplast, which is acting a bit like a switch. Okay, the timing here is to the nearest millisecond, so we're taking advantage of Arduino's ability to measure to the millisecond. And there's also a reset button that will help us facilitate the measurement because we want to do some repeated measurements of time. Now the first set of code here involves setting up some values. So I've got a bunch of variables here, and we want to just sort of go through and describe what's going here. The upper sensor, the lower sensor, and the button, these all refer to the pins that the Arduino is going to be using to detect and measure whether there's a signal or not. So they are set to values 3, 4, and 8. These values are not set in stone. You could modify them. The Arduino has digital pins that range from 0 up to 13, so there's 14 pins there available, although 0 and 1 are usually reserved for special functions. However, these, like I said, you could change these numbers. I've just set them here. Notice the variable names. They are clear. They're not just A, B, and C or something like that. We can obviously tell this is for the upper sensor, this is for the lower sensor, and this is for the button. Okay. These three things here that say int 3 times refer to integer. So the value that is going to be inside this upper sensor variable is going to be an integer. And all our pins are going to be integers. They could, like I said, could be from 0 to 13. Coming down here, we've got some booleans. Booleans are either true or false, and they really run well for determining the state of the device. So like it says here, Boolean variables for controlling the device states. So these are, is the timer running? Yes or no, true or false? Has the reset button been pressed? True or false? And is the reset true or false? And you'll see that come up below. So the only two possibilities for these ones could be true or false. And then the 3 variables set down here, these are going to be involved in the measuring time. So there's the start time, the end time, and then the calculation to figure out the duration. Now, these might seem kind of odd here. These are the variable types. It's unsigned, long. And what this refers to, the unsigned, means that there is no plus or minus. It's just going to always be a positive value. Because there is a limitation on how much memory is allocated to the variable, this makes sure that we can get as much accuracy as possible. So does this word long. So long refers to a long decimal, basically meaning that we have a very long possibility in terms of decimal places. So you could get a number that's much more accurate than if you were just using, say, int, which would have no decimal places, or the other version is sort of a float. But that sort of truncates the number of decimal places we can have. So this just makes sure our values are as accurate as possible. Good. Now moving down to our first function, and in Arduino we always have a setup function which basically initializes certain things. And like it says there too, the setup code runs only once, so this is only going to be runs right at the start when we begin our Arduino, and then basically it's just going to set our pins to be input pins, and then set our serial readout, and then also call our reset function. So pins, the digital pins at least, can either be either input or output. In this case, we're just trying to read the signal that's coming in. And so therefore the upper signal, the upper sensor, the lower sensor, and the button, which are all the pins, all 3 of them are input types. Okay. So it's going to read that signal coming from, and is it a high or a low, which we'll see in a little bit. That's all it can do. It can't send out a signal. Now the serial begin, don't worry too much about this. The idea here is that the Arduino can communicate back to the computer at 9600 baud, which is just the number of basically bits per second that's being transferred, and it's just saying begin our serial connection with our computer. Don't worry too much about that, like I said, but the idea is that that allows the computer to communicate with the Arduino and vice versa. Really, the Arduino, I guess, to the computer there. Okay. And then the reset, well, we'll just look at that in a second. It calls the reset function. So the reset function does a few things. One is it resets the time measurement variables. Okay, we'll see that in a second here. And it sort of helps the user, sort of a user-friendly way of letting them know if there's a problem with the device or if it's ready to go. So the three variables, we've seen these before, start time, end time, and duration, they're just reset here. That just clears out any values that might be in there, because if you're doing multiple measurements, those can get values put into them, and we want it to sort of to start fresh each time. Otherwise, we might have some problems, okay, or erroneous measurements. Now, these two conditions here basically are checking to see, is the sensor ready? And then if it is, say it's true. So basically what I've said here is if it's the upper sensor is low or the lower sensor is low. So if either of those conditions are true, that means the device is not ready. So it says sensor error, fix and press reset button. And then that, we'll see later on, will let it check again. What we're looking for is really that the upper sensor is high and the lower sensor is high as well. That indicates that they're both ready, and so therefore it prints out ready and it sets this reset to true so that the computer knows that we're ready to go. Okay, now the main meat of the functions is inside this loop here. And so the loop, remember, in Arduino is meaning that it's running repeatedly. It just keeps checking these conditions in this case, okay? And so we have a condition to see if the ball's been dropped. Now the upper sensor will always read high if the ball is sort of setting into the pin. And however, when we release the ball, the sensor reads low, and therefore this statement will be true here. So if reset is true, which we set up here, and the timer is running as false, and it's false by default, the digital read on that upper sensor, if that's low, so there's three things that have to be sort of true here, right? So if the ball, if it's ready to go, we've reset it, the timer is not running, it's false, and that sensor is low, meaning that the ball's been released, we start the time. And it's measured in, like I said, in this milliseconds. The time running becomes true, and the reset true becomes false, okay, because it's not reset now. And to give an indicator to the user, we put up this, the ball is falling. Now, the ball will now hit the lower sensor. So that lower sensor will read high, it will be connected until it's hit by the ball. And when that ball will break that circuit momentarily, okay, so just for a second, just millisecond, and it will lead to a low on that low sensor. And the timing will end and the duration will be calculated. So like it says here, if the timer is running as true, which we turned on once the ball was dropped, okay, and the digital read lower sensor is low, which happens when it breaks, so if those conditions are true, we end the time. So that just puts a time in there. So we've got a start time value and an end time value. Timer running is false, okay, so that sort of sets that. Then we calculate the duration. So we do the end time, which had a value in it, and the start time minus the start time, which had a value. So then we just print that out, fall time in milliseconds, prints out the duration, okay, and then just an empty line here, that's all that is, and then press ready when button to reset, okay? So it just basically is going to reset the button there. Now the last thing that it has to do in the loop is check for the button here. And so really what it's going to do, the reset button, just a value here is going to read that button. And so if reset button is false, okay, and reset is true, okay, then it's going to print time reset. And it's going to set that reset to true and run that reset function, okay? So then we can take more measurements over and over again. Good. Hope this helped out. If you don't quite understand it, play around with the code. That always helps. Change some values. Things could be improved on here. This is not perfect. Most code is never perfect. But hopefully it's clean enough and intelligible enough for you to understand what's going on. Thanks for watching.